freedom and representation, the dwelling, and Denmark is going to a 20% liberty stock.
I just want to draw the attention to the section I covered yesterday, 158, the first paragraph.
158, first paragraph.
The second line of the here Leibniz says, freedom of as the possibility of commencement, referring to happiness, to the marvel of the good time, standing out from the company.
No, 158.
158? Oh, 148.
148. No.
That's what
Okay. 148. The
first paragraph.
the first paragraph.
Here he says,
Freedom as the possibility of commencement. Referring to happiness.
It is the perfection of the art, and not one experience among others that happens to the eye. So it seems that for Leibniz, saturation already implies a freedom. So the freedom in this sense.
Yes, certainly. But it's a flexible word. It's more the freedom of a good time, in the sense of enjoyment. Yeah, right. Freedom of a good time. Let's have a good time.
Exactly.
In enjoyment.
In the sense of saturation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's what like I call the free fall, sky flying. Yeah, yeah. That sort of freedom. Okay, so that's good to point that out. Freedom is very deep. It goes to self-sensing, but it's. I think when we get to the freedom of representation, the freedom is this tempting freedom. We'll bring in the notion of Gaiji's ring, where I am not determined by what I know. I remain free in what I know. That's this is put on the board here. This is from Otherwise Than Being, or Beyond Essence. On page 9, if those of you have the text, he talks about retention, memory, and history. Right? These are recollecting movements or representational movements. So even in the passivity of retention is this self-folding, this folding upon oneself, and then the active synthesis of memory. And it's this time of postponement, right? The synthetic time, the projective, protentive, retentive time. And then at a social level, this would be history. And we know he's going to contrast this, which he does, with the immemorial, which breaks out of the framework of retention, the unrepresentable, which breaks out of active memory, and the invisible or the prehistorical, which is breaking out of history. And we'll get to that. But if you want to turn in your own text, if you have these somewhere, you should take a look, as when we talk about representation, at pages 9 to 11, in Otherwise Than Being or Beyond Essence. And he always brings these three together: retention, memory, and history. Nothing is lost. Everything is presented or represented. Everything is consigned and lends itself to inscription, or is synthesized, or as Heidegger would say, is assembled, in which everything is crystallized or sclerosized into substance, in the recuperating temporalization without time lost, without time to lose, where the being of substance comes to pass. And he's saying, here we have to find the diachrony, because this is the great block of diachrony, right? This is what leads to idealism. This is the temptation of idealism in all thinking, and yet it has to be undermined. So the immemorial, unrepresentable, the invisible, the past that bypasses the present, the pluperfect past, right? It's a wonderful expression, the pluperfect, the more than perfect past. It's sitting like something has happened. It's already happened. The pluperfect, more than perfect. It's so wonderful. It's the more and the less, the despite me, the responsibility. So if you have brought those texts, I would, oh my God. Is there a napkin? I would, thank you. I would recommend that you look at those. But start a discussion about this notion of freedom in representation, which is a kind of abstract freedom, which is not a genuine freedom, and yet is necessary to create a just world, as we'll see when Thursday and Friday. The freedom of thought. I've heard people respond to Levinas in the academy, this insistence upon ethics, responsibility for others, saying, what, I should alter my research because of these ethical concerns? Isn't the research independent? Don't I just find out the results from what I'm doing? And I say, of course you should alter your research. Well, this is not even a question. And more scientists are realizing that, so that today you can't do research that harms animals, right? It makes perfect sense. Now, there are certain overriding concerns. I mean, it's a difficult freedom, so that if the result of the research could have A, B, C result, which would be incredibly important, then yes, a certain degree of pain in the animal will be allowed, right? But if it's just for cosmetic sake, then we say, no, we're not going to allow that, right? I think all of us are aware of that. This kind of so when people blindly go on about the absolute freedom of research, it's false. There is no. There ought not to be. A classic case, one doesn't even barely want to refer to it, is research the Nazis did. We don't even know what to do with that research. It's so tainted, right? People don't know what to do with that. As it turns out, it's mostly very bad science. So there's not much you can do with it anyway. But that the disinterestedness in representational thinking, in theory, is the freedom of thought, is the most absolute form of freedom. If I'm not mistaken, that's where freedom is located. That's where Levinas wants to locate freedom. I don't think we don't often think of it that way. After German idealists, the German idealists thought of it that way, but we're not prone today to think of it that way. But Levinas reverts back to that idea that freedom is a freedom of thought.
Can you explain prehistorical?
It's just an expression that Levinas uses on page 38.
Does that really
Otherwise,
mean
the being
invisible?
of the organism. What?
Does it really mean to invisible? Or no, it's separate?
It's what he later calls holy history. It's because for Levinas, history at the top level, at the level of representation, is the history that's recorded in documents, and the history that has monuments, the material history. Whereas for Levinas, real history is what he calls holy history, of the events that occur between people that have no record in the said. So that someone was describing, Victor was describing to me what it was like here in Lithuania in January of 1991. Right? Or Americans could speak about what it was like on 9/11. But eventually that stuff can't be recorded. That stuff is lost. People then put slants on it, they put spins on it. We see that all the time, right? And you feel like, oh, it's kind of gut-wrenching, things are being stolen from us, we're losing things. Stendhal, for example, who was here in Vilnius, feels the loss of the spirit of the French Revolution. He sees it being lost around him. But how can you capture it? It's not written. It's not documented. It was something felt. It was something that transpired that is not part of the documented history. So the great historian is able to bring to life. I wonder, like, why do people write historical novels? I always think, I want the actual history. Because a great novelist can bring to life the holy history of the historical event that a historian can't. They put fake words into people's mouths, and yet you say, that's what it was like. There it is. I've got it. And then we don't know whether to trust it or not. How can we verify? How can we not verify? Now this is at the level of history, but this also occurs interpersonally when we speak of ethics and the saying of the said. in the Hebrew Bible, in Ecclesiastes, it refers to this poor man in a city that was being besieged, and he came up with a plan to save the city, and the city was saved, and then he was forgotten. And I'm thinking, exact image, a Levinasian image. Except in Ecclesiastes, it's as if this guy wants fame, we should have fame. But actually, who cares? Right? The city was saved. But it's that unspoken history. We've seen this happen. I know people who have, say, organized a conference. They were the force behind it. And then later someone else gets credit. And you go, oh my God. And yet all the written records, someone else gets credit. And you go, what about this person? So you feel compelled to put this into the written record so that people will know. Right? But then there are other people putting things in the written record so that it will come out otherwise, contrary to the way it was. Right? So for example, take the case of Holocaust denial. Now it seems to us absurdly, horrifically, I mean, it's the biggest lie of our time that there was no Holocaust. And yet the Holocaust deniers are filling the newspapers and the book libraries and the historical record so that 400 years from now, when no one cares about the Holocaust anyway, right? Like, does anyone care today about the Inquisition in the medieval period? Is anyone whining tears over that, or the destruction of the Second Temple? No one is bent out of shape. So 400 years from now, when no one cares and no one's alive, there in the historical record will be thousands of documents saying it never happened. Right? So who knows 400 years from now what they will think about what happened? That's history as representation. Whereas the invisible, or the prehistorical, is what really happened. Now, it also can be documented, but you can't capture it. That is, everything that can be documented is ambiguous. It has an ambivalence to it. Derrida showed this more than anyone. Any record can say the opposite of what it says. Every poison is a cure, every cure is a poison. We know the atrocities that are committed in the name of the New Testament, the atrocities committed in the name of Jesus. There are many wonderful things that are committed in the same name, right? But there's nothing in and of itself that insists, that has, in the realm of the said, in the realm of the historical, its own valence. Nothing. Nothing. So, this is why Levinas is turning to the saying. The saying is where the actual meaning of things occurs, where it arises from, and where we can revivify it, re-say it, to bring it back.
But I don't think Levinas here presupposes there is the fact. It's not represented, it can't be memorized. There's nothing you can memorize. Even without record or with record, it doesn't matter. It just, there's no fact. Because you can't represent.
No, I understand what you're saying, in the sense that you could never retrieve it, true.
Or it's just like, you don't need to, like, you don't want to.
No, you do. You need a constant effort to revivify the moral and the juridical meaning of things.
For justice, not the
Well, to maintain our humanity. That's the constant, unfailing, constantly failing effort. The effort that always fails and must unfailingly be continued. Right? I can't go on, but I must go on. Right? I cannot bring the truth to its purity. I cannot say the saying in its pure saying, but I must continue to try. So that Levinas never stops re-saying and re-saying and re-saying, and it's not like Hegel's logic. It's not done. It can never be done. It's outside of formal logic. So at the level of history, that's when he uses the word prehistory. Again, by an abuse of language, because he doesn't mean prehistory in the sense that, say, Nietzsche means it, or prehistorical in the sense of dinosaurs. He means it's outside of history.
But it's still a relationship with the other.
But sure.
So it's like in historical level with the others. Because it's following.
Sure. The unsaved.
Of course, but you can't say unsaved without mentioning the others are there. Then what?
But it's the same to others.
It's not for truth, I think. It's for the others.
It's said
for
to
your
others.
responsibility. It's for justice. I just,
I know, but truth is necessary for justice.
yeah.
Truth, there is no justice without truth. That's the whole idea.
But the truth got to be secondary in front of justice.
Yeah.
Well, for instance, I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, I'm sorry, but what the heck. If you've ever seen what goes on in a courtroom, somehow it's very heartening and it's very disheartening. Because the courtroom is, as the American courtroom is set up, I assume most European courtrooms and Chinese courtrooms and Indian courtrooms are the same. Everything depends on the evidence that can be presented in court. It has nothing to do with truth or reality. It has everything to do with the evidence. Right? And enormous injustices are committed in the name of that limitation to the evidence. Nevertheless, we all believe that that's closer to true justice than any other method. That is, we must present the truth as we can, which has evidence in the court, even if we can't bring in the pure saying, as it were. That's why there's different methods of a court. In the American court, the judge keeps his or her mouth shut, and the lawyers present the evidence, and that's the totality of the evidence. I know in other court systems, the judges are able to intervene, right? The judge can intervene. Yeah. In a Jewish court, the judge can intervene. So the judge can actually say that again, what are you saying? Or can you or ask a question, but not in an American court. So same here, only what the lawyer, so it's modeled in the American court. Or I don't know what ours is modeled on, it was originally modeled in the British court. But only the lawyers can bring in the evidence. Recently I was called to jury duty. I don't know if you've done jury duty. Yeah. Jury duty, has anyone done jury duty? And it's a very demoralizing experience because you're with your fellow citizens from all walks of life. And usually academics get excluded. Usually the lawyers don't want professors in the jury room. For some reason, I got through somehow. So there I was with my fellow citizens. And you're trapped in the jury room with only the evidence that's been presented. You can make a million conjectures. And there's a lot of information you want. We're all sitting there saying, I wish they had asked this, or why can't we get this document? In our case, there was one document that was everything hinged on it, and we needed more information about the nature of the document, the character of the document. We couldn't get that information. And it was the end of it. We were stuck. And I think this is, again, I'm not attacking this as if there's something better. Right now, this seems to be the best we can do. And yet, you can see very poignantly in a court system the conflict between evidence, manuscripts, documents, the said, and the saying.
The lawyers.
And the lawyers, and the lawyers are only concerned to win. They could care less about the truth. The truth has nothing to do with anything. They just don't care.
It's the only problem of rhetoric. The rhetoric doesn't care about truth.
Right.
Or falsity, for that matter. It's just about convincing somebody of something.
Right. So that in the face of the documents, we have two directions we can take. The direction of the sophist and the rhetoric, and the direction of the truth, and the unsaid. And Levinas says, let's reanimate the unsaid, the living human dimension of it. And others, such as Derrida, are saying, let's play with the words. Let's have some fun here. For what purpose, I have no idea, but it's fun, I guess.
But the problem is that
And you should know, because you do this.
You know, what does the lawyer do when he dies?
When he dies? No, what does that happen?
He lies still.
He lies still. Oh, so clever.
Okay, wisdom.
Now, does everyone get that? English fun? Very good. Good. It's a double fun. No, it is the problem of rhetoric. And rhetoric itself can go both ways. You were suggesting that Levinas's phenomenology, like Heidegger's, was a hermeneutical phenomenology. I think it's more of a pure descriptive phenomenology. But one of the one of the virtues the hermeneutic phenomenology claims for itself is that it can take advantage of rhetoric to bring to light what could not otherwise be brought to light. For example, the famous example of Heidegger with the Van Gogh shoes, right? which in the end becomes so laughable when you look at it. I mean, it's embarrassing what he says about Van Gogh shoes. It's so distorted and false. And, but you can see what he's trying to do, right? It's just a sad job. I think. I don't know if you looked at this. It's absurd in the work of art. Yeah.
Meyer Shapiro's article.
Yeah.
The art historian Meyer Shapiro tried to said no, these are not peasant women's shoes. These are Van Gogh.
These are Van Gogh shoes, right? But it's not just that.
He carried his article.
Yeah, you read it. It's like
Is that he was trying to make a point about how the work of art functions. It is not a thing that is not a. I agree with you. It's distorted. So
in this case, yeah. No, but I can see. But I'm saying that the effort was to use rhetoric to bring the truth out, right? That rhetoric. There's a sweet rhetoric, and then there's a bad rhetoric. So the rhetoric itself is a double. It doesn't have a single valence.
of course.
Right? We're always going to have to use rhetoric. And that's why the rhetoric of science, which is self-correcting and open to criticism, is a very powerful rhetoric. So the structure of anterior posteriorly is the structure of representation.
Memory.
This is on the top of page 170. Yeah. Of memory,
Yeah, memory.
which is representation. Right? Memory is representation. The extraterritoriality and the sovereignty of thought anterior to the world to which it is posterior. Anterior posteriorly. Separation is not thus known, it is thus produced. That is, there's a way of producing separation through representing what occurred, such that the representation of what occurred explains what occurred in terms of a principle or an origin that is independent of the time of the occurrence of what occurred. That is otherwise than the time of the occurrence, what I'm calling the beginning. I'm saying there's a beginning prior to the origin. And yet, for representation, the origin is the true beginning. It effaces the actual or the concrete beginning in the name of the reconstruction based on a principle. So it knows what happens better than what happened. Now it's a very attractive thing because it's a powerful explanatory mode. It's not nothing. This is not inconsiderable. This is how knowledge operates. It's a reconstruction. It's an analysis and a synthesis. It's a rebuilding, going down to its parts and reconstructing it, showing you its true nature. But Levinas is saying the thing that it's reconstructing had its own character independent of the reconstruction, and that character must be taken seriously. Right? So that the dualistic thinking pulled up that original concrete phenomenon as if it was a ladder that could be discarded after the intellectual reconstruction of the phenomena, and said that the intellectual reconstruction of the phenomena is the phenomena. So that Spinoza's ethics is the truth, and everything else is ignorance. It's illusory. So that what is lacking to dualist thinking is what I would call an ontology of illusion. That is, the illusion is real. The question is, what is the reality of the so-called illusion? It is not what representation says it is, namely an illusion. And this is why phenomenology, in Levinas's hands, has to break from the primacy of representation, and which is why it is descriptive rather than axiological or explanatory. Right? It's positivist in the sense that I call ultra-positive, in the sense that it has to discard all theoretical constructs to account for what is. So that Levinas can bring in the dwelling. The dwelling comes in. Why is it that representational thought, except Aristotle with political thinking, doesn't bring in the dwelling?
But the dwelling is his representation.
The dwelling is what?
Is Levinas' representation in some sense.
In some sense it is, and that's why he tells us, that's why I began with the notion of the method of concretization. That is, we can challenge his phenomenological analysis, but we have to be cautious that our challenge isn't a function of the needs of representational thought. Remember, Husserl insists over and over to the things themselves, to the things themselves. And this is, and also presuppositionless, to the things themselves without presuppositions. So the greatest danger, and Husserl himself succumbs to this danger, often, not always, he does, of the primacy of representational thinking. Because it has its own agenda. Its agenda is that what it considers the principle, or the condition for the possibility, is the ground of what is. Right? So you could call it, it's a restriction. So Levinas cleverly calls reduction the restoration of the concrete. And then further, and this is in line with the way you're thinking, he calls the reduction the restoration of the saying. Because that's what he really needs to do. Right? For Levinas' thinking, the true concretude of all of these levels of meaning comes from restoring the saying. Which is why, after section 2, you go right into the face, and then for the rest of Levinas is the face, and also it's why before section 2 we've already got the face. There's no mistaking the primacy of the face in Levinas. But for representational thinking, it has no primacy. There is no face. And the ego of representation is not my own. Again, criticism of Heidegger. As if the way to exceed and break out of the impersonality of the transcendental ego is through the existentalia. Levinas is saying, no, that's not the way out. The way out is awakening to the saying of the said, not to the so-called it's more concrete. In a certain way, Heidegger is saying, this is more concrete. Levinas is sure it's more concrete. But the source of the concretude is the saying of the said. That's the extra step that Levinas will take that you don't find in Heidegger. And again, I'll go into that on Friday. Yeah. Yeah. So this is one of the most important things to learn from Levinas, which he got from Bergson, the anterior posteriority. Because unto itself, it's not visible. Unto itself, we simply have representation, the representation, the projection, the retention, and yet the inadequacy. One of the places Levinas finds the inadequacy, as you know, is in Husserl's inner time consciousness studies. Levinas finds in the notion of the or impression that Husserl himself is forced to admit, this was in your dissertation, forced to admit that this is not intentional. It's not an intentionality. Husserl is such a great scholar. I mean, we love this about Husserl. He doesn't just say, all right, I'm going to bury this under the rug, you know. He lays it out. He doesn't do anything with it. He can't do anything with it. He doesn't know what to do with it. But the or impression doesn't have the structure of intentionality. And for Husserl, everything has the structure of intentionality. Right? So what it is for Levinas, the or impression is that bursting of the self of the enjoyment of the body into thought. Yeah.
I have to agree with you once more.
I'm happy. I like that. Nothing wrong with that. I agree with Levinas.
I say that by Husserl, things get even worse because it's not just the or phenomenon which is irretrievable. It's the constitutiveness.
The constitution?
The fact of constitution of consciousness
Yeah.
is irretrievable. So the way the consciousness, or the fact that the consciousness constitutes itself cannot be grasped by the consciousness.
He doesn't like that.
Of course he doesn't like it. This is he cannot do anything with that. The fact that the consciousness is constituted by something which remains outside the conscience and which cannot be tapped, which cannot be. And this is the most difficult thing.
It's a sore point.
Yeah.
But then go back to what I said. For Merleau-Ponty, the solution is to admit that the reduction goes on forever. But Levinas says, no, it's not a matter of the reduction going on forever. There's something incommensurable with the reduction. And that's the ethical saying. He's saying, it's incommensurable.
I think
It's
Husserl.
otherwise, right? And he's saying, Merleau-Ponty is still attached to Heidegger. It's simply, in a way, it's making a virtue of the infinite regression. But one can see why he says that. Merleau-Ponty's right. The reduction doesn't complete itself.
Because this would be a way out for Husserl.
Yes.
But the fact is that Husserl, the biggest problem for Husserl was the fact that he could not make this reduction because time was irreducible. So the biggest problem in Husserl, I would say, is that he cannot do away with time. He tries to do this in almost every writing. He tries to argue that the origin of time is in our conscience, but he cannot do this because the conscience is not constituted by itself.
Yeah.
The moment of the constitutivity of the conscience lies outside the conscience. So time has to be transcended to conscience. When time is transcended to conscience, there is no reduction. There's no epoche.
This is why for Levinas, I completely agree with what you're saying. This is why for Levinas, the entire Husserlian project comes under the category of synchronization. It's synchronization. Bergson said that representational thought is, despite the duration, the representational thought is simultaneous. And there's something about that we all understand. When I try to prepare for this seminar, I'm thinking, how can I say everything at once? I want to say everything at once. I want to have one little burst of speech, where 400 layers of Levinas comes out at once. And now we got it, right? Because if it's true, it's all true at once. Of course, Bergson, brings up the notion of duration, which is of a different order, and that's not possible. There couldn't be such simultaneity without the duration, which already Bergson understood, and because Levinas took this over also, is one-directional. That's a very interesting thing, because Bergson also has the insight about representational thought, that it doesn't matter if you reverse the direction of time. It's fascinating. It's interesting, because if representational is what it claims to be, then what difference does time make? There's no sequence. Everything is simultaneously the case, so time means nothing. Bergson breaks out with duration. Husserl tries to keep synchronization across duration, right? And I said that's the great innovation, the duration, ecstatic time, projective time, but Levinas sees the project of synchronization loses actually the dimension of time. There's no time. No matter, that is, the transformation of the specious present into presence doesn't actually bring in time. It just makes the delusion more difficult to escape because it's more accurate. Right? So we have these three forms of retention, memory, history. So this is where the trauma occurs, because we're dealing with passive synthesis, so that it's already too late. Right? The synthesis has already been disrupted. Right? As you want to say that I am already disturbed, as it were, by the other before I even started. So everything we're doing now is going to be redone through the encounter with the other. Right? Yeah, the beauty of this enjoyment is it'll never be undone. You know what I mean? That the self will not be absorbed into anything. The self retains its independence, its atheist possibility, and yet it will be redone. But not undone.
I think this is where Levinas goes beyond Heidegger. Because what Heidegger is trying Heidegger is searching in being and time the phenomenological soil. He's searching everywhere for this phenomenological soil. But the fact of the matter is that there is a non-phenomenon which constitutes the phenomenological soil and which is not accessible by any means. It's just there, but you cannot go to it. It's irretrievable.
I know. He thought he had that, though, the ontological difference. I don't think he succeeded, but I think he realized the problem and he thought he had the answer, but it didn't work.
Well, he gave this you would go with the strange answer, because the whole Heidegger too is trying to deal with this problem, but on his own terms.
Yeah, yeah. You know what's sad, when we talk about this Heidegger-Levinas relation, Heidegger had ample opportunity to respond to Levinas. Their lives were overlapping. Levinas wrote his criticism while Heidegger was still publishing and writing and teaching. He had ample opportunity, and he ignored it. He just ignored it. It's very sad. And not only that, you know, this famous confrontation in Davos between Cassirer and Heidegger, which Levinas attended. You know who invited Levinas?
Heidegger.
No, Heidegger.
Really?
Yeah.
So he knew him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's even more
Yeah, it's
pathetic
worse.
that he didn't
That's-
respond
that's
to it.
right.
And Levinas said excuse for Cassirer widow.
Well, Levinas was embarrassed by what happened. You know, what they did at the end of Davos each year was they'd have a little spiel, a play, a mockery play of the professors. They dress up with the professors and make fun of them, like a comedy that comes after tragedy, the Saturnalia. So Levinas took the role of Cassirer.
What could be the reason, you think, lack of Heidegger's response to Levinas? What could be the reason, in your opinion?
I think the nature of Heidegger's thinking is not a dialogue. I think the nature of his speaking excludes the saying, the unsaying. It's a thinking that is looking from a third party, from outside, for a voice, for an answer. It's not, he talks about philosophy as the dialogue of the mountaintops of the great thinkers, but there is no such dialogue in Heidegger. I was saying at an earlier conference here in Vilnius that the debate at Davos was so revealing. As you may or may not know, it was about Kant interpretation. Heidegger was about to publish Kant and something of metaphysics, Kant and the problem of metaphysics. And Cassirer was, of course, the greatest Kant scholar alive in Germany. He edited Kant's works. He just was the great Kant scholar. So they were debating over the meaning and the role of imagination in Kant. Because imagination is the real interesting point in Kant that no one has ever understood. What is the exact nature of the schemata? The schemata which is meant to bring together the understanding and the sensibility. Kant says it, but it doesn't work. And it doesn't work, I would say, because of the dualism in Kant's thought. But nevertheless, Kant is the genius. We try to break our heads against the notion of the schemata. Well, Heidegger thought that the best way to interpret Kant and the schemata and the imagination was exactly what he had done in Being in Time, through the temporalization of time. That really the function of the imagination and schemata was temporalization. So he gives this interpretation of Kant, which is simply another version of Being in Time. Now, Being in Time was such a great work, everyone's enthralled by Heidegger. He won the debate, he was more popular. But Cassirer, who was the far greater scholar, presented what Kant really said. Right? So this was an accurate representation of Kant. Now, I think this debate is so important because Cassirer had his own philosophy. Cassirer wrote the 3-volume Philosophy of Symbolic Forms. He had his own thinking. But he had the intellectual integrity, because he was in dialogue with people, to put that aside and say, and this is what Kant is saying, because I'm in dialogue with other people. This is what Kant says. If you're not asking me, but later at another conference, I can tell you the difference between Kant and what I'm saying. But no, at this debate, I will tell you what Kant's saying. But Heidegger did not have the resources or the intent to say what Kant said.
Heidegger always says what Kant could have said.
What he could have
He
said.
says better what Kant says.
So I said at this earlier conference, and I'm repeating myself, that you don't turn to Heidegger to learn Kant. You turn to Heidegger to learn Heidegger's Kant reading to learn Heidegger. And the classic case, everyone knows this, is you don't read Heidegger's Nietzsche to learn anything about Nietzsche. There's no Nietzsche at all in Heidegger's Nietzsche. You read Heidegger's Nietzsche to learn about Heidegger, right? No Nietzsche scholar takes seriously Heidegger's Nietzsche, right? It's just a fascinating reading. It's inventive. It's creative. It's Heidegger again, right? So every time you get to Heidegger, it's Heidegger again. So why is this illustrated? I think it's illustrated because Heidegger is not engaged in a conversation. Heidegger is a kind of oracle. Now, for my taste, I don't want to hear oracles. Right? What?
May I say you short stories that I heard from Professor Bernard Coulon, who wrote Merleau-Ponty in Cambridge collection of.
Tell the story.
Yes, yeah. When he was a student of Sorbonne, he came to Heidegger in his mountain house.
Yes. Tell the story.
And it was after the war. And he was moving all the day from Paris to this ugly mountains house. And when he came
I'm listening.
and stepped into the door, some lady opened the door. He said, Bernard Coulon said, I am student of Sorbonne and I'm studying philosophy and I like Heidegger very much. May I pose few questions to Professor Heidegger? And as Bernard Coulon told me many years ago, this lady looked at him precisely, said, my mandant, and closed it.
Go on. And that's the end of it.
Yeah.
Oh, because I'll tell you the story that we have told. And I heard this from
Football,
two.
I was waiting.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go to the end of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's the end of the story. From two other stories. From Richard Kearney, who just told me this last week, and he himself personally experienced it, and Alvis Miskunis, who told me this 3 weeks ago. He's a philosopher from Ohio University, he's Lithuanian. Same response at the door. My man is thinking, my husband is thinking, and they push their way in, and there's Heidegger watching football on TV. That's how that story continues. But in both cases, it illustrates what, in all three cases, what you want to say. He's not in dialogue. For us, it also illustrated that Heidegger had a level of enjoyment, that he enjoyed life, that he watched TV.
Or he's in another kind of dialogue, so dialogue without human presence.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
Many clinics, you can find this in many clinics.
I think that Aleke is a kind of approach to Heidegger's dialogue.
Here's the problem, though. Levinas had a serious criticism of Heidegger. I mean, if Heidegger lived in a time there was no one worth speaking to, which is pretty darn arrogant, but if there is such a time, and one can imagine there could be such a time, then okay, he has no one to talk to. He makes his own interlocutor, he talks to himself. But that was not true. It was not true in Heidegger's life. There was no one to talk to. I mean, I'm putting aside, say, Gadamer. I'm sure he talked to Gadamer. I'm sure Gadamer was worth talking to. But not to talk to Levinas, it's a scandal. It's a scandal in philosophy. And there's so many scandals surrounding Heidegger. But anyway, it's sad because we all would like to have heard what would he say, what would his answer be, how would he speak. Levinas is a severe critic of Heidegger, but he's not disrespectful. As his work progresses, he has more and more kind things to say about Heidegger's philosophy. You know, it's his greater and greater appreciation for Heidegger's philosophy, which he radically disagrees with. Now, Levinas made a distinction between Heidegger's philosophy and Heidegger the person. Levinas deliberately never went to a conference that honored Heidegger as a person. He did not respect Heidegger as a person, but his philosophy he did. Yeah.
I think this is a difference one has to make in the case of all philosophers.
One doesn't want to make that difference. Though. One doesn't want to make that difference. It's demoralizing to make that difference. I'm always, I'm always disappointed when I learn these terrible things that philosophers do. I want to venerate them. I don't want an oracle, but when I say venerate, I want a philosopher who lives his philosophy.
Well, I think you're stuck with Socrates.
There you go. You got Socrates. Yeah.
Yeah,
No
there's a
TV.
line
No
from
TV.
Max Shaler.
What?
Shaler was once asked, Professor Shaler, you write so eloquently about ethics and that your own life is a mess. Not quite in that sense. Shaler responded, well, the signpost never gets to the city.
The signpost never gets to the city. All the rationalizations. All the rationalizations. With that note, why don't we try to stay a little bit closer to schedule? Maybe Yolanta is going to enlighten us as to what our procedure is
No,
today.
it's just
So
going to lunch.
we'll walk together over to, it's not far away.
No, it's 4 minutes. Yes.
And we have, isn't there some question about where we're going for dinner, but we'll figure that out
Yeah,
later.
like, well, for dinner, unfortunately, we cannot go to Nering, the hotel which is listed, because Europe Parliament is taking over, so we'll go to another place, Gedimino Devinė. Gedimino Devinė, it's closer, so just on the Gedimino side.
Yes, we'll see.